for being here today, and I hope this presentation will be useful, and by the end of it, you'll walk away with something practical you can apply in your day-to-day work to make development and testing a bit smoother. Let's maybe start with a quick intro. As Alyona said, my name is Dmytro. I've been working as a software engineer for almost 6 years, mostly with React, and it's how to say, and React, it's a never-ending ecosystem along with Node.js on the backend. So that's enough about me. Let's jump into the topic. MSW, mock once, develop and test with ease. Before we dive into the details, let's talk about where MSW fits in, why we need it, and how it can simplify both development and testing. But instead of throwing a bunch of facts at you right away, I'd like to ask you a few questions and describe some real world situations. And if any of them sound familiar, then you're definitely in the right place. And by the end of this talk, I hope you'll walk away with some solid food for thought. So let's start with our first question. Those questions are divided. Two of them will be about testing, and the rest of the questions will be about development. So let's start from the first question, which is related to testing. So have you ever felt that pain when writing a unit test for a component that makes multiple asynchronous requests? If you have, you probably ended up doing something like this, defining a bunch of just mock calls at the top of your file, manually mocking path to modules, and setting return values for each test, and copy pasting those mocks into other test files. And then if the module path or the structure of the mocks data changes, guess what? Now you're fixing mocks in 5 or maybe in 10 different places. And here's example of what I'm talking about. Now, maybe this example doesn't seem as scary as I've made it sound, but the more asynchronous requests your component has, the more code you end up writing like this. Eventually, you might find yourself with a test that starts with over 100 lines of mock setup, and the only thing the test verifying is something like it should render correctly. So sounds a bit funny, right? But unfortunately, it's something many of us have experienced. So let's move on to the second question. It's about testing. Imagine you're working on a medium or large project with solid test coverage, and your team decides to switch the data fetching library, maybe from Fetch or Axios to something like Tenstak Query, Redux Saga, or another library. And now you've rewritten all of the code where those async requests were made, and everything is working perfectly, but your tests for components with those requests are failing. Why? Well, apparently it's because you used just mock to mock specific modules, and your tests now are tightly coupled to the implementation details like fetch, Axios, or whatever library you were using. So now every time you change the implementation, you need to rewrite all of those mocks to match the new behavior. And let's be real, if your team switches to a new library in the future, you are probably going to find yourself in the same situation again. So the main point here is that if you mock some API requests in your tests, so those mocks shouldn't know anything about implementation details like what you use, Fetch, Axios, or some another data fetching library. So let's switch gears to talk about development. So third question is about development. So, have you ever had to build a front end without a backend? Maybe you're about to present a demo in the next maybe 2 hours, but the backend isn't ready yet. Or perhaps your customer wants to see how the UI will work without waiting for the backend changes, just to ensure it meets their expectations. So, what would you do? I imagine you'd end up mocking everything manually, which can be time consuming and clutter your codebase. And later you'll have to go back and remove those temporary mocks, or worse, you might leave them in, which creates extra work or even technical debt. And and now the last question before we dive deep into MSW. Uh, have you ever needed to create a demo environment without backend? Has a customer ever asked you for a separate demo environment where you didn't need to set up the backend or database, just a simple UI? The catch is the UI needs to look polished, even though it's not functional under the hood. Because let's face it, most customers focus primarily on the visual aspect of the app. So what do you do? Building a fake backend for a demo is often overkill. Manually mocking data inside components only makes maintenance harder. And perhaps the worst part, switching between real and fake data can quickly become a nightmare. So So what if all of those problems we just talked about weren't such a big deal? What if there was a tool that could simplify testing, speed up development, and remove the pain of working manually, both in unit tests and during development? And well, as you probably guessed from the title of this talk, the tool is MSW. So what is MSW? MSW stands for Mock Service Worker, and it's API mocking library that intercepts requests on the network level and responds with the mock data you define, making it easy to reuse across different tools, frameworks, and environments. Before we dive deeper, here are a few key things to know. First, it works like a server, but without the headache or complex configuration. Later, I'll show you a simple setup. Just a few lines of code can give you full control over your mocks. And it's not tied to React, so MSW works with any front-end framework, or even without one, actually. And last but not least, it's not just for testing. You can use it during development, especially when the backend isn't ready or the API is still being defined. So now let's finally see MSW in action. So on this slide, I'll walk you through how to set up MSW for unit testing. Right after this, I'll show you a short demo so you can actually see how it works. As I mentioned earlier, just one slide of setup, that's all. So that is everything what we need to write in order to set up that MSW server for our testing. So what we have right here. So first thing we should do, in order to create that setup, we should create an array of handlers. Each handler represents a mocked endpoint. In our example, we mock requests to posts and return a list of posts. You can define as many endpoints as you need here. You can also add simple logic inside handlers if needed, but for the sake of this demo, I kept it as minimal as possible. So, second step, what you should do, we should create a mock server. Notice that we import setup server from MSW node. Later, I will explain you when we will talk about MSW with development, because there will be a little bit another flow, but right now we are talking about function, which is called setup server, and it is imported from MSW node. So it's important for testing environments, and we then pass in all your handlers using the spread operator. And eventually, third and last step, finally, at the top of your test file, we set up the server's lifecycle. It starts the server before any tests run. Then it resets handlers after each test. This is especially useful if your handlers have some temporary state of emulate a fake database. So after each test, it will be reset. And after all of those tests, it will shut down. And that's it. Simple, flexible, and powerful. And it already solves a lot of the headaches we talked about later. So let's now check how it works in a real demo. So I've prepared some little project. So our demo. So first of all, I would like to show you some kind of files, but they are not complicated. So you can see here, first we have some mock data. Nothing fancy, just arrays of mock posts, comments, likes, etc. And after that, all of those mocks are inside these handlers. So we talked about handlers, and you already know that each item in this array represents a specific endpoint. And then we have a server. So it just a setup server function, and we spread all those handlers from previous file into this setup server function. Then we have our test. We have our file which I'm gonna to test. It's called app.tsx, but you don't have to pay attention to all of those logic, because the main thing what it does, it just fetches posts, comments, likes, and it returns some basic JSX, and that's all. So just three asynchronous requests and some JSX which is based on those requests. And now let's go to our test file. Here our test file. We have what we have right here, just a bunch of imports, nothing extraordinary. Then we have describe, and we have those hooks, before all, after each, after all, and all of those hooks, we need them in order to start our server that I showed you previously. So before all test, we should start our server. After each test, we should reset our handlers. Actually, right now we don't need it because we don't have any custom logic there, but I just added it in order to show you that we can reset those. And after all, we have a function that closed the server. And I just put some console logs here. So after I run this test, we will review our console logs from here and from handlers, and we will see how it works in a runtime when we start our test. And a few words about tests. So here I just check that I have my posts and title and body is correct. Then I check that I have posts with comments and likes. And here I use a server use function in order to emulate an error. So in this case, when our component from this test makes some asynchronous request, MSW emulates a real error, and we can test some error cases. Like in this example, we will see some text with failed to load data. So let's give it a shot and let's just run our test. And you can see everything is fine. And now let's look into our logs. So we started our test and server starts working. Then MSW return mocked posts for the first test, comments, likes, and it resets handlers. Then second test starts and it returns mocks posts again. Then it returns comments again and likes again and resets handlers, and it works for all tests, and eventually server stops working. But that is not everything I wanted to show you. Right here in application, I prepared some example for you. So what it does right now, I would like to comment this section because this section uses just fetch in order to fetch some data. Yes, and now yes, I commented it. It fails. And right now I want to uncomment this section because this section, it uses Tanstack query as a data fetch library. And you can see I have promise all to get posts, likes, comments, and I have use query, which is imported from Tanstack query. And it fetches data using Tanstack query. And let's just save it. And let's run our test again. And you can see everything works fine. So now you can see that flexibility that MSW gives us. It is not tied to implementation details like fetch, access, and stack query. It works like a real server and it intercepts requests on a network level and like a backend. And you don't have to think about all of those mocks, like how I have to mock fetch or maybe Axios or Tanstack query. You don't have to think about it at all. Everything you need to know that I should set up handlers, server, and run this server in my test file. And it will work like a real server. So that is everything I wanted to show you about testing, and let's switch to development. So give me just 1 minute. I would like to return everything as it was. Yeah, great. And let's switch to development. A development flow won't be complicated, but it will be a little bit harder than that flow that I've just showed you. So let's talk about development. As I said before, it's a little bit trickier than testing setup, but don't worry, it's very similar to what we've already seen, and I'll walk you through it, so everything will be fine. So just like before, the first step is to create handlers. So nothing special, we've already seen it. I've already described you what handlers are, and yeah, nothing special here. And just to remind you, here's an example of these handlers, and we have some posts endpoint, comments endpoint, and likes endpoint. And when our component reaches one of those endpoints, we will have that mocked data. So let's go to the second slide. So the next step is to generate the MSW worker script. To do that, run the following command in your project's root directory. This will create the service worker file that MSW uses to intercept API requests during development. But to be honest, don't worry too much about what's inside that file. You don't need to touch it at all. Just make sure that it lives in the public directory, and you're good to go. So next thing we need to do is to create a worker. And it's a different step because, as you remember, before we used setup server from MSW node, but for the development, we should use setup worker from MSW browser. It's a different step, and you should keep it in mind. Actually, it works in the same way. We just take our handlers and spread them into the setup worker function, like this. And it's almost identical to the test setup, only the difference that we are using a browser specific worker instead of a server. And eventually, last step, let's look at the index tsx file. This is our entry point of our application, React application, where we usually find the div with ID root and render our React application into it. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with it. What's new here? This is where we enable our mocking in development, but instead of blindly enabling MSW in every environment, I've added a bit of logic to check the current environment first. We have a function called enable mocking. It checks if mocking should be active, for example, in development or preview. And if yes, it loads the worker we created earlier and starts it. The key part here is that we wait for the worker to start before rendering the app. And the question why? Because it ensures MSW is ready to intercept requests before our components start firing off network calls. It avoids race conditions where your app loads, but the worker isn't ready yet. With this, switching between mocked data and real backend becomes really easy and safe. No hard coding, no extra flags in your components. It's all centralized and controlled at the entry point. And let's dive into the demo. So let me just show you my code and let's open other files. So before I prepared some files for testing, but I would like to close all of them because for development I prepared another files. So give me just 1 second. It should be mocks. So our first file, mocks, the same as before, but I just prepared another mocks to show you for development in order not to repeat everything one more time. So second file is handlers. Here we have those handlers. You've already seen them in our presentation. We have 3 endpoints: posts, comments, and likes. Then let's go to our server file. And nothing extraordinary here. So you can see a setup worker from MSW browser. And this function is called with provided handlers. Then let's go to the worker script. So here's my public directory, and inside it you can see mock service worker. So I've just run that command to generate this file, and you don't have to worry about it too much. But maybe if you have some custom logic or some advanced things that you should do, in this case maybe you will do something in this file, but it's maybe for some advanced cases. But anyway, the main thing what you should know about this file right now is that it's generated by MSW CLI and it should live in your public directory. And let's go to our main TSX file. So everything that I showed you before, we have enable mocking function which checks current environment, and if it's if it's not development, return, and if it's development, so we should mock our server. And after the server is started, we should render our application. So it will be synchronous. The first thing we should start our server, and only after that we should start our application. Yeah, and let's Actually, let's run our project. Yes, and let's see how we can understand whether those mocks are enabled or disabled. So, uh, by the way, important thing to mention about testing that I used Jest as a test runner, and now I'm using White and Whitest, and it works fine for both. So no matter which test runner you use, it works for both just fine. Yeah, and let's run our server. Great, it works. Oh, great, it works. So you can see this component with posts. And what we have right here. So yeah, as I said, here you can see the posts along with their likes and comments. Everything are mocked earlier, but uh, how we can understand that it's mocked via MSW? We have some kind of evidence. Let's inspect and let's go to console and reload the page. And when environment uses MSW for development and it mocks some data in console, you can see those messages. First of all, mocking is enabled, and you can see which endpoints were reached. And we can see that we fetched posts. Yes, and it works on a network level. So yes, actually you can do something like this. You can go to network tab and you can see how it works like here. We can see response for posts, response for comments, response for likes, and we can see the same here. So everything is fine. We have 200 code, and we can see some additional information which can be useful for you. But anyway, the main idea is that it works and it mocks your data, and you can create some front-end application when backend is not ready or backend is still under development. Yeah, and let's go back to our slides. Hop. And yeah, before we wrap up, I want to mention that MSW isn't limited to just mocking REST APIs. It also supports WebSockets and GraphQL, which gives you a lot of flexibility for testing and development. So if your project involves WebSockets or GraphQL, you can take a full advantage of MSW to mock those as well. Be sure to check out MSW can be used in those scenarios too. It's a game changer, for handling different types of APIs in your applications. Yeah, and eventually, that's everything I wanted to share today with you. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you found it helpful. And now you have a clear understanding of how MSW can make your development and testing easier. And I think that now we can switch over to a question and answer session. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Dmytro. We have one question in the chat. Could you please check it?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I see this question. So yeah, it's possible. And I talked about it before. Your handlers can have some custom logic. And let's just think about generators in JavaScript, yes? So every time when your a component reaches this endpoint, you can create some generator in JavaScript. And every time this function generator will give you another response or something like this. It was just an example how it can be done. But yes, you can add some extra logic there, and you can configure this logic in some kind of way to give different responses. For example, MSW supports query parameters, and depends on those query parameters that you pass to MSW, it can it can generate different responses for your application, and by doing this, you can just have a different responses which are based on query parameters or some other condition. So,
Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, I have another question.
Please.
Can
yeah,
you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, you showed that it could be used for testing and for local environments. But what about like testing real environments? Does it have any, I don't know, some provider like to check some response in some test environments, because it's also very useful, and there are a lot of cases when you need to rewrite some response to test something on real environment, but not in prod, for example, on test environment.
So let me just rephrase your question. You mean that we have a backend, yes, but maybe it's not ready, and maybe MSW should take all of those response from backend, modify it, and return to your application, right?
Yes, something like that. Actually, there is in syntax from DevTools, for example, in Chrome, but it will be more useful to have some UI, and to change some parameters very easily. Is it possible or not?
I'm not sure about it, but I think that I saw some use cases how MSW can work, and if I'm not mistaken, I saw this example. But let me check, and I'll reach out to you later, and I'll answer on your question. Okay?
Okay, and another simple question about hot reload. Imagine that I have some local environment, and I need to replace some, I don't know, in handlers, to replace the response. Do I need to restart application, or it will be like kept on the fly, like hot reload?
No, I think you don't have to restart your application because MSW works with your main component, like in main TSX or index TSX. And every time when that main or index TSX or GS, yes, it re-renders MSW as well. And you don't have to like stop your application and run it again. But it worked like this for me, but let me just check. But let it be on 90% sure that it works like this. Yeah.
We have one clarification question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, give
From
me 1
Miroslav.
minute. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yaroslav, you're right. Express.js can be used to cover all of those scenarios, yes. But to create a separate folder for Express, to set up everything, maybe it'll be a little bit, overkill for maybe people who just begin work in this area. And the main advantage that I showed in this presentation is that in order to create this server, you just have to have a few lines of code, and it works alone with React application. So it's everything in one place, and you don't have to go to React applications and come back to Express, modifying something there, and then go back to React application and do something like ping pong, because everything is placed in one place and you just work there.
May I add one more scenario about why Express.js is not suitable enough in this case? For example, as I've written before in the thread, you also can mock your responses for Storybook when you're developing something in Storybook. And Storybook gives us ability to work with the screenshot testing. And if you want to test something in Storybook that requires your component to be interactive, I mean, to interact with some third-party API, you won't be able to do so with Express.js because you will need to configure third-party server that your component is going to interact with. You have to take care of networking, security of this network, and so on and so forth. So MSW, just register a worker in a browser that runs this application, this UI application. And that means your request won't go out of your browser. So it's just isolated piece of application, and you still be able to develop. You are able to test it with the same mock data, and you also are able to develop UI without backend implemented yet, like this.
So yeah, MSW wins here.
And sorry, one more thing. You also are able to use the same mocks in 3 different places. So you can decide with your backend team how response will look like in future. You create some JSON file with this kind of response, save it somewhere in your repository, and you already are able to write unit tests, storybook, and other things. So you're able to develop front end ahead of backend. Once we were ahead of backend for 2 months because of this combination.
Okay, we have one more question in the
I see.
chat.
Chance MSW. Real query. Real query, let me think. Actually, when you set up this worker, MSW worker, yes, it's tied to your application. For example, you have localhost 3000 and you have your application like dash home, yes. And every time when your home component tries to reach out that MSW worker, it goes to the same local host, but to another route in order to get the data. And you just, you actually can catch some requests, but it should be the same domain, or maybe you can configure it in the same, in such kind of way without React to catch those queries. So I think that technically it's possible, but I'm not sure because I've never done something like this, but it's a good question.
I guess Sergey has a comment about this question. Yes, Sergey?
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Yeah, and yeah, for sure, the case I shared, if the domain matches and if the URL, everything matches. So it does. Thank you.
So I even see some configuration for this. Yeah. Yeah, I see.
It
So
allows you to configure it different ways. So usually you need to bypass everything except of kind of endpoints you registered. But you also are able to pass different value into property on unhandled requests, like catch everything. I don't remember actually, and it will work with everything locally.
Any other questions?
Any other cons except the one with the same URL? If you got, for sure.
So could you please repeat? I'm not sure that I got your question. Yeah.
What is the cons of using MSW?
One cons, You mean in a scope of testing or in scope of development?
In scope of everything, in scope of when you want to mock the real API, when you're testing, you can consider both cases.
For example, I know about um, another use of MSW. For example, I worked on some project, Node.js project. It was a long time ago, and I remember that I wanted to include some integration testing in CI/CD. And what I did, I just run that MSW alone with that CI/CD process, and I made that integration testing, which and MSW was like a, it was like a proxy. So it was long time ago, but I remember that I used it for testing Node.js application. It wasn't about React, but it was about Node.js, and it really helped me with that integration testing. If you're interested in it, I can try to find some solutions that I made there and to share it with you.